Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always by my co-host Nick Filato, and today we've got a special guest on. It's funny because we actually had this planned before any of this news broke and before people have been reaching out to us, which has been interesting and exciting, saying, get Bobby on the show. We already had that plan because we want to talk football with Bobby. We want to talk Giants offseason, Giants direction, and draft, and this is the guy to do it with. It's Bobby Skinner. You knew him from Talking Giants. Now Bobby's going in a different direction with the Giants Nation show. So, Bobby, before we get anything going, I want you to tell everybody where they can find your work now and what you're doing in the future.
Yeah, it's Giants Nation show. I think the @ is Giants Nation Pod. So this is, like Giants Nation Pod on some things, at Giants Nation Show on others. But you look up Giants Nation Show, you should be able to find my face on there. And then the YouTube is the main thing. So excited about it. Obviously, you got to grow something from zero to try and build it back to what I once had. But I'm excited about it, and I'm excited. This is the first show I've went on since, so I'm excited. And Filato's going to be on Giants Nation on Friday doing mid-round prospects like we do every year.
I love it. And go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just going to say, Bobby and I always have a great time talking about the mid-round prospects, and it's great. Go and look up Bobby's beautiful face and give him a follow if you have not done so already.
Yeah, one more thing. What can people expect on the Giants Nation channel moving forward?
So, again, I need to get through the first 3 months of figuring out before I add a full co-host, but I couldn't do the draft without somebody, and the Football Grump, who does the Just Giants podcast, who, he's been part of our draft coverage and Senior Bowl stuff in the past. So he's going to be doing a lot of the draft stuff with me, if not all of it. But hey, draft previews of, positional previews, when the draft gets there, recaps, for the first round, live streaming the whole thing, film breakdowns of all the players, similar to some of the stuff you guys do. Going to just keep some of the same staples that had before, just going to be different.
Awesome. So let's get into some talk now. Let's get into some Giants football. I want to start with Giants stuff and the offseason that we've had play out in the direction, and then we'll get into some draft stuff. So I first want to ask you just your overall feel from the direction that Joe Schoen took this offseason. It doesn't have to be just at quarterback. You can touch on that as well, though.
Yeah, obviously it starts at quarterback, and I think they've kind of backed into the smart play at the quarterback position, even though it's not by bringing in the best quarterback available, right? Like they went hard after Matthew Stafford. I really don't believe that was to pair with a rookie quarterback, or at least not a first-round rookie quarterback. They were going to pay him a lot of money. He was coming here to play for 2 years, not to be someone to develop a first-round quarterback. And then when that fell through, when they thought that was going to happen, right? That's not something they just, touch bases on. Like they believed that they were going to get Matthew Stafford as their quarterback. Moved on to Aaron Rodgers, which I was okay. I actually wanted, until I realized, Aaron Rodgers hasn't really learned much from the Jets process. And hell, he still hasn't signed at this point, right? Like the Steelers are the only team that wants him. He's working out with DK Metcalf, but he still hasn't signed. Like we're getting the same old game. So I moved off of that and wanting Russell Wilson and then a backup QB. And that's kind of what they did, right? You got Russell Wilson, who I thought was the best available starter outside of Rodgers. And then Jameis, who everybody loves and is fun at times, but he's not fun if he's actually the starting quarterback. So he either has to be a backup or a bridge to a quarterback who should play fairly soon. And now he's in that role. So I think they've actually done the right thing. I don't think it raises their ceiling a ton, because at the end of the day, Russell's not what he once was. Jameis loses games for you, even though they'll be exciting games. But I do think they've done the smart thing instead of going all out on a Matthew Stafford.
Certainly raised the floor of the New York Giants, because as Dan and I have talked about, I'm sure, Bobby, you've touched on it a lot, the quarterback position has significantly held the Giants back. And last year, I kind of wanted to preface this entire conversation by getting your opinions on the Giants offensive line last year. Because Dan and I, we believe the Giants offensive line, specifically when Andrew Thomas was available, it took a pretty substantial step from what we saw in 2023 and even what we saw in 2022. I wouldn't say that they were a top 10 unit or anything crazy like that, but all we're looking for is a league average unit. So with that offensive line, if the Giants can replicate that from 2024, first, I want to know if you agree with Russell Wilson. What do you think the ceiling of the offense could be?
I still think the ceiling is kind of middle of the road with Russ. There's going to be games where he can't run quick game. He's taking sacks and stuff, but he also, even in his bad years with the Broncos, he was still one of the best deep passers in the NFL. He can still scramble and throw. So I think it's a middle of the pack offense. With that offensive line, I agree with you guys, right? Like, especially as a pass protection unit, they were doing pretty damn good. It was like I'm not used to this as a Giants fan with Andrew Thomas. Then Andrew Thomas went down and it didn't do as well. But I will say this. We've seen the Andrew Thomas-less Giants in the past, and what's happened to that offensive line. This was a much bigger upgrade, like over what it was. Yeah, was Evan Neal bad? Was Chris Hubbard bad? Sure, but it wasn't like early 2023 where it was like, this is hard. This you can't really function behind this. Like, this is unbelievable. And like that Miami Dolphins game, and other games where it's just like, this is really rough, or that first Dallas game. So it has raised in that sense, but I also, you guys know me, I'm the Andrew Thomas #1 fan, right? Like, I probably wouldn't trade him for 7 first-round picks. I have an emotional attachment to him. It feels like we got to start slating for him to miss some games, the same way Tyron Smith did for the Cowboys for all those years, right? You don't move off of him, but you got to slate in some missed games for him. And I think they'll be an okay pass blocking unit. The run game, I think they lack a little bit. They kind of were stuck to running duo and anytime they got gap stuff, they could run it here and there. But if they tried to run it consistently, they just didn't have the guys to pull and make those plays. So it is hell of a lot better than what we saw for years. But I still think the ceiling of this offense is like 15th or 16th. But that's also like the best offense we've gotten in like 7 years.
I would sign up for that instantaneously.
Oh, yeah.
Point, right? Especially if the defense can take a step forward. But you brought up the swing tackle position. So I really wanted to ask you, because this is something Dan and I have talked about quite often. Evan Neal, it's rumored he's going to be moved inside the guard. That's fine. Giants bring in James Hudson III. Firstly, what are your opinions of James Hudson III? And secondly, do you think the Giants still need to maybe make a day 3 swing, or maybe something even earlier for the swing tackle job to challenge James Hudson III?
Yeah, I actually think Stone Forsythe is a challenge to James Hudson, right?
Different types of players.
Yes, very different types of players. Now, I will say, at first I was like, oh, hell yeah, Stone Forsythe. And then people are like, he's ass. And I was like, why did I kind of think he was better? Because I remember him.
Gotta be the name.
He was the reason I didn't want Azeez early on out of the draft in the first round because of that game.
Florida Georgia.
What I remembered was he did well against the Giants, and they put him on, like the Seahawks put that dude on an island. Like, I think he had like the 7th highest island rate in the NFL as a backup tackle. Like, Ryan Grubbs, you're a lunatic out there. So I think it's still a battle for them. It's a better situation, I guess, but I still think it's an issue. But it's one of those things where there's no such thing as a good backup offensive tackle in the NFL. It's like the backup quarterback conversation. It's like, well, if he was good, he wouldn't be a backup. But at least they have like more than a handful of guys in there. And hell, they could even bring back Chris Hubbard, who I actually think was an advantage in the run game, despite being terrible as a pass blocker.
I agree with that. And one more thing on the offensive line I want to hit on. Evan Neal and Josh Ezeudu. What are we going to do with these two players? I'm imagining Evan Neal's, I don't want to say a lock to make the team, but he's probably going to make the team. But what about Josh Ezeudu? Are these guys going to be swing depth interior offensive linemen? Do you have any hope that any of them could work into the tackle conversation? Or do you think the signings of James Hudson III and Stone Forsythe eliminates that conversation?
I think Ezeudu's done, right? Like, Stinney would be their first backup guard right now. I like that they brought back Greg Van Roten, but I still me and you were, doing, on our preview pod, we talked about Jonas Evania, like 3rd round. I would love to grab a guy like that still, even if he's not asked to start right away. So I think Ezeudu's done. Their whole plan for him at tackle. It actually made me feel dumber last offseason because I kept on harping. And I was like, why aren't you trying him at guard? Why are we doing this tackle thing?
What happened?
And the Giants were just like, nope, he's a tackle. I was like, am I the idiot here? And then he plays and they bench him after 1 week.
We all got gaslit, Bobby.
People don't know what the word gaslight means. I actually think that's what gaslighting was. It's like, no, he's a tackle. He's a tackle.
What are you guys looking at? It's like, wait, what am I looking at?
I was like, I don't think so. You didn't draft him to be that. You drafted Evan Neal. With Neal, I think you take a chance to guard, but I think you guys are the same opinion of me. I don't think Evan Neal's skill set really translates all that well to guard, right? We
in the NFL?
Eric Flowers and Mekhi Becton, but Mekhi Becton actually had some good tackle tape at times, and he was not just good in the run game, like he would whip. Like I remember watching him as a rookie just beat, smack around Nick Bosa in the run game. I was like, there's only Trent Williams is the other guy that could do this. And even Becton had his flaws at guard. So I don't think Evan Neal's going to work at guard, but they also, I think you guys are of the same mind too. It's at least worth a swing because it's either he's a decent guard or you trade him for a 7th and 6th round pick swap after training camp.
Exactly. Try to capitalize on that spoiled investment. At least that's what it seems at this point. One thing on Evan Neal, last year, him playing right tackle, I thought that might have been the best we've seen him play. And that is a very low bar, but the best we've seen him play since he's entered the NFL. And I know it wasn't great, but what are your thoughts on that?
I thought they did a good job hiding him at times, and it wasn't as bad as before. But I just think any hope in Evan Neal for me is lost. Again, try him out at guard. But he's never going to be good there, right? Could he get to a could he become a swing tackle eventually? Sure. But that's never going to be something that the Giants are like okay with, right? Like even if he is a good swing tackle, you can't bring him back as a swing tackle when you draft him 7th overall. He has to kind of go do that somewhere else. Right. So I would do one last ditch at guard, which they are, right? I know they talked about it in the owners meeting. That's something that's been happening. Like he is moving to guard. And again, like if it doesn't look good in camp, like I'm not holding out any more hope. Like I'm looking for a Jordan Phillips type of like pick swap trade at the end of training camp.
And I'll keep it a little bit locked in on the offensive line because I'll just do a little shameless promotion for Bobby here because I know he would do the same for either Nick or I if we were restarting and doing some kind of thing like this. His offensive line breakdowns are phenomenal. You may have seen them on Talking Giants. You may have not. You may just be somebody who listens to our show and doesn't listen to their show. So now check out Bobby's channel, Giant Nation, because he's going to be doing the offensive line breakdowns. I don't know if that'll be on the Patreon or not, but regardless, it is well worth your time. And I'll say this. I am not somebody with the same kind of football background as Nick or Bobby. And I've learned so much from doing this show with Nick. And I've learned so much from watching every single week of those Giants offensive line breakdowns. And that's the type of stuff that you can learn too. And you'll feel a lot better about where you're at with your opinions on the Giants offensive line. So I want to stay on the offensive line here. And I look at this tackle position as a very interesting.
By the way, it's really cool. Nick Falato knows I have to DM him every once in a while, like what's the deal with this run fit and stuff like that. So that's reciprocal.
Bobby and I are homies, man.
Yeah, you guys are the premier guys in Giants Nation when it comes to X's and O's film, and so we all appreciate that. But I want to make sure everybody has eyes on that. Now, let me say this: tackle I view as a very interesting position for the Giants moving forward. I always like to look at this roster 30,000-foot view. I look at it as one of two ways. The Giants have to get serious about this position because I don't think Evan Neal has any kind of long-term projection at that position. It's either they can re-sign Illuminor now or after this season. I don't think they're going to re-sign him this year. I think they're going to make him play out this year and go on from there. He'll still be at that point, I think 30 years old, which in tackle terms is not devastating. It's not young either. Or they can make an investment, in my mind, at 34. I don't think if they wait to 65, they're going to get a long-term solution at tackle. You can look at the history of offensive tackles taken in that range, and it's really bad.
Yep.
So I don't think Joe Shane's the kind of GM who's going to take a tackle at 34. I don't think he operates like that. I know he claims he doesn't draft for need, but you guys have done a great job breaking down on your show that really hasn't been the case. And so I look at it like, where is our long-term solution at tackle? Is that somebody like if the right player was on the board at 34, would you consider taking a tackle at 34, even though it might not help us this year?
1,000%. But like you said, tackle is usually a go early or nothing at all position. And there's obviously outliers, right? So like Josh Connerly.
Yes.
Would love. I don't think he gets to 34, right? And I haven't watched every single guy. That's out there, but I would love that. And I'd love to bring back Illuminor, but I think Illuminor saw the contracts that were given out this year, including James Hudson. And he's like, there's no way I'm signing for anything that's not massive. But I would love to keep 11. Even if you extended Illuminor, you could bring in somebody, you could draft a Josh Connerly. And then if he works out a tackle, you move Illuminor back into guard like was originally planned with him, even though he may not, love that, that decision, but he did agree to do that last year. So yeah, I've kind of left no position unavailable at that pick 34, especially where the Giants are.
So one player I wanted to bring up, just because it is this offensive line at 34, I have no gauge on where this player is going to go because he tore his patellar, and that is Ohio State's Josh Simmons. Now, none of us are doctors. Let's say that that's not a long-term, something that could affect him too long-term if our doctors check it out. How would you feel about Josh Simmons at 34?
Yeah, let's just eliminate like injury stuff because, like you said, we're not doctors, right? Like when people ask me about Abdul Carter, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I just like watching him play. Yeah, absolutely. Again, another guy where you don't need him to come in, play right away. I know that's kind of been like a necessity but for every Giants pick in the top 100 recently. But like, you don't need him to come play right away. Coming off the injury, you have Illuminor there. He's played both left and right, and like he's got that athleticism that you buy in on a tackle, where it really is an athleticism position, where you have to hit prerequisites to go. So again, like guys like that are people that absolutely are. Like, am I going to tell you about his injury history? No, I don't. But just as a player, I like it. But the last time there was a guy who I loved, but I was like, but the injuries was Landon Dickerson,
Oh
and then the
yeah.
guy doesn't miss a single game in his NFL
Right.
career. So maybe we take a chance.
I'm a big believer in that. Past injuries are not a great predictor of future injuries. It's something I've always believed in the sport. Somebody like Frank Gore was viewed as an injury risk earlier in his career and then played like every game for the second half of his career and didn't miss any. So I think it's a lot luck based, but I will want to do one more question on the offensive line. I promised the listeners, it's not just going to be a pure offensive line show. We're going to hit everything, but Bobby's expertise is the O-line. A player who I didn't love in the draft process, didn't want him in round 1. They got him in round 2. Everyone's like, I guess technically this is an amazing value because this is what the board says. But I just never loved the projection was John Michael Schmitz. I haven't been too enthused with what I've seen from John Michael Schmitz. That felt like one of the biggest need picks in this regime's era so far. Can you talk me off that ledge? Is there hope for him to be something more than just like the 15th best center in the NFL?
I think that is the hope for him. And I was someone who was in on John Michael Schmitz. He's when you wake up Friday morning after drafting Deontay Banks, it's like who do we get at 57? I'm like, it'd be really nice if John Michael Schmitz is there, and I obviously missed on that. I do think he made significant improvements under Carmen Brasillo.
Yeah,
he's a high IQ player, which matters at the center position, so he's not making mental mistakes, and having Greg Van Roten and John Runyon next to him helped a lot compared to Marcus McKeithen, who missed his assignment on like half the snaps that he played last year. And in the run game, working combos and stuff, he can get some movement, but he's always going to be a guy when he's one-on-one with above average pass rushers loses. Now, again, he's not going to be the worst center in the NFL. I think without watching every center, he'll be someone who is in that 15 to 20 range, which isn't the worst thing ever, especially looking at the rest of that draft class. But my hopes of him being a top 10 center, which I thought he would be, those have kind of dimmed out. But it's,
I think
again,
at
interior is a
55 you have
position
to
that
be.
guys, but interior is a position where guys blossom a little later. But the thing with JMS is he was an older prospect, so you thought that you wouldn't need that, patience.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Look, we all love to work out. The summer's coming around. You want to look good in your bathing suit. But in order to enhance your workout, you want to go and use MitoPure from Timeline. This is a great product. When I started using it, it makes me feel stronger, gives me more energy. I recover quicker. I'm in my 30s. I still have the energy to work out. And if you want that energy, you really should give Timeline's MitoPure a shot and work it into your routine. The great year of 2025 is your year to be the best, most energized, most revitalized you. MitoPure promotes cellular renewal and mitochondrial health to address common signs of aging at the root. MitoPure is the research-backed innovation that unlocks your fullest potential. Timeline is offering 10% off your order of MitoPure right now. So go to timeline.com/banter. It's timeline.com/banter. That's TIMELINE.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll have to see where that goes because I think if that's the case, Bobby, and his ceiling is kind of that range, you look to potentially move on at some point, even in considering this draft class, because it's not necessarily that doesn't mean you take another guy at 55 or at 34 or 65, because I don't love that direction, but you can get centers that can beat around league average in day 3, and it happens all the time in the NFL, sometimes as as free agents. So just something to consider on the O-line. What about guard? Let's hit that and then we can move forward. What are your thoughts on what the Giants have at guard, the future at guard, and any possible players that might be in the mix at 34 or 65?
I think you got two pretty similar players in Van Roten and Runyon who are, about average to, maybe a little above average as pass protectors in the run game. They're just not big assets, right? Neither one are great pullers. They can they can run duo and stuff, but they're neither one are going to be great zone blockers, even though Van Roten can get out and move a little bit. I think you have like the definition of average at guard, which we're doing a Giants show, which that like sounds good, right? Like, we're okay with that. But I would again, I'd be looking to upgrade that position. And it doesn't need to come and start day one, even if you draft a guard at 34 or at pick 99 or whatever. And that's why I was a big fan of some of the changes that Joe Shane has learned from is, you know what? Don't let John Feliciano and Nick Gates walk for cheap. Bring one back, and then, then you could still draft a center instead of going into the draft without a center. That's why I was a fan of bringing back Greg Van Roten, who I actually didn't think he would be willing to come back until he was guaranteed a spot after training camp. But I think he wanted to stay close to home.
I too am happy that Greg Van Roten is back. When is the last time, boys, that we've had an ass kicker on the interior parts of the offensive line?
I mean, Lemieux had a little nice stretch as a run blocker, and they kind of transformed that run game in 20. Yeah, but like you said, he was terrible in pass pro. Those for 18 reps against Denver will always have me.
It wasn't Zeitler. I don't know who it would be. Like the last ass kicker on the interior.
And I bring that up because I just look across the division and I see Philadelphia and I'm like, oh, they have a couple ass kickers, and they get rid of ass kickers and they bring other ass kickers in to kick ass. And
they're going to fix Kenyon Green. One of my biggest, another miss by me. But I know that they're going to fix Kenyon.
They're going to fix him. They are going to fix him. They have to. That was another miss by me too. Let me ask you. Let's move it forward. We want to talk about all the spots. Let's talk about quarterback position in the future. This roster at the quarterback positions. The Giants have obviously signed two guys in Winston and Wilson who won't be their future at quarterback. I think that's pretty obvious. And from listening to you, I don't think you see any future for Winston as far as like a Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield type reclamation like some of these other coaches have. So as far as quarterbacks go in the draft, we're going to operate under the assumption, Bobby, that Cam Ward is out of the mix. We are not getting Cam Ward. He's going 1 overall to the Titans. I'm almost positive that's what's going to happen. So I don't want to even operate under that assumption that it'll be available to the Giants. Now we're at 3. Is Shedeur Sanders somebody that you would consider at 3? Is Jackson Dart somebody you would consider at 3? Where are you at with this 3rd overall pick when it comes to quarterback?
I just started Dart, but I don't see someone I'd want to take at 3 early on. Shedeur's not, and I check out the new channel. I have a 45-minute video on Shedeur, and we'll have a quarterback draft preview next week talking about it. And me and Filato talked about it as well too on the show that's coming out Friday. People will point at the arm talent and the lack of athleticism and be like, see, that's why you can't take him at number 3. And I don't think that's true. I think that's the reason why I'm not going to bet on him fixing the things that worry the most for a guy with his level of talent. Because of how accurate he is and how high his completion percentage, because accuracy is his best attribute. I actually think he can make a guy miss a little better than people give him credit for in the backfield. Obviously, NFL will be bigger than 12, be bigger than the Big 12, but he was able to do that. The sacks, obviously, he creates a lot more sacks than are needed, and he's been attributed to being a really good post-snap processor and anticipator because of his accuracy and completion percentage. And I don't think the film shows that at all. I think anytime defense is throwing disguised coverages, he did not know what he was looking at, and he would be late, and it would lead to turnovers. It'd lead to incomplete passes, and it would lead to sacks. And then the anticipation, I think, is just right. Like I don't think he had this great anticipation, but again, he can throw the ball deep well. He's accurate. He's got the arm talent, but for me to bet on you with that level of talent, you got to be doing all those other things in an elite way. I know people will compare him to Joe Burrow. Granted, had Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and this is where I could be, or not, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and Terrace Marshall. This is where I could be wrong, is if Shedeur had that talent, he could do it. Shedeur doesn't operate the middle of the field. Part of it because of the offensive line and stuff, and there is issues. So I think he's a quarterback that lasts, because if you don't turn over the ball a ton, you're accurate, and you can run quick game, you spend 10 years in the NFL. My issue is I don't think he's spending 10 years in the NFL as a top 10 quarterback.
And that's not something you'd be willing to invest number 3 in overall, correct? Is that how you evaluate quarterback?
No. It's something that you would be willing to invest maybe in the second round, but if the way the NFL draft goes, if you view a quarterback as a second rounder, he's going to end up going in the first round.
And I think a lot of people have trouble kind of coming to terms with that, but we kind of always try to break it down as like there's an opportunity cost to giving up that third pick for the player. In this case, it could be two really good players if they're available for the Giants. So let me ask
It
you this.
sucks, but and I want to finish.
Yeah,
I want to be a just take a swing guy. Like eventually,
same.
like I want to be that guy. I really do. It's a much easier life, but unfortunately, I'm someone who's like if I got anything, I've got my opinion on a player. I'm never, I'm not going to move off of it until they show me otherwise. Which is why people are victoring JJ McCarthy after he's played 0 snaps.
Oh God, the victory laps on some of these guys like Penix after 3 games is crazy to me.
I'm glad you do this. Michael Penix may end up being great, and he's put together some nice throws.
Yes.
He has like the highest missed throw rate in the NFL last year. Like it's like
know
quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson, and then Michael Penix. But anyways, and again, he may end up being great, but it's like, why are we victory lap this? Because he made like 10 really good throws in each game, which is good, but it's not a victory lap worthy.
Now, let me ask you one more thing on these top quarterbacks. We said nothing. Dart, you're still working on. If Cam Ward, let's say he's not going to happen. Let's say he was available at 3. Is that a player you would take at 3?
Absolutely, and I have a breakdown coming out on him. Whenever this is out, it'll probably be out. Absolutely, right? I do think he processes really well from the pocket and sees things. He is aggressive. He makes some of the wow plays. There's obviously worries, right? I think he lacks precision at times. I don't think his accuracy is amazing, but we've seen guys clean that up. There is a little bit of Jameis where he trusts that a cover 3 corner is going to stay vertical and not sag off and pick up a wheel route or something. And he gets, puts the throw of the ball in the DB's hands basically almost once a game. That would happen. It's just DBs have bad hands and want to catch them a lot of the time. So there's risks, but there's so much good there that I'm 100% okay with taking the risk. He would have been quarterback 4 for me last year's class, and like I would have had him like well above the guys that I would have had, the McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix in that class. Nix looks good, granted, but I would have Cam Ward pretty far above JJ McCarthy.
It seems like we're on the same page there too, because Dan and I we're fans of Cam Ward as well. Do you have any more quarterback questions for Bobby?
Dan? No. Let's keep it focused on that third pick though, if we can.
Okay, keep it focused on that third pick. All right, so big debate: Dual Carter, Travis Hunter. It looks like the Giants are going to be in the position to select one of those two. Cam Ward's more than likely going first overall. Dan and I have talked a lot about this. I love Abdul Carter. Me personally, I would select Travis Hunter. I wanted to give you the floor to expand on your opinions. If the Giants are in that and say, let's just say they had a choice between both of them at 3, which way would you lean?
I'm an Abdul Carter guy, and I'm gonna play the strings of Giants fans' hearts. Remember when we had a good pass rush and then we drafted Jason Pierre-Paul? Remember when we did that?
Of course.
Remember when Justin Tuck became the 3rd guy to Michael Strahan and OC? Like, this team is nowhere near good enough to stop me from adding a pass rusher. And Kayvon, I think, made improvements last year despite the lack of sack total. But again, I think Abdul Carter would be much better. And then you pair him with Brian Burns. I understand that there's some redundancy a little bit in skill set because Abdul Carter's a little smaller. And when you get, 2 sets of hands on him, like you handle him in the run game. But I think he's so disruptive when he doesn't have 2 sets of hands on him in the run game that it makes up for the times where he's giving up the edge. That I just want that. And I love Travis Hunter. Another guy I'm working on a video of. His corner film and his instincts and his football IQ is just nuts. And then you think might be the best wide receiver in the class. I'm willing to try him play both ways, but I still like, how is that gonna work in the NFL? I just don't know yet. But where I do know is like, I think Abdul Carter is the best player in the draft. He plays a position that I would love to add talent at, and I would go to Abdul Carter. But if they draft Travis Hunter over Abdul Carter, I'm not going to sit here also and be like, this is a massive mistake. Like, I get it. Like, watching Travis Hunter, it is hypnotizing watching him, play all different types of coverages for Colorado.
And I don't want to speak for Dan, but I believe we're just on the inverse of that. Like the Giants had the opportunity to select both of those players, and they went with Abdul Carter over Travis Hunter. I'm still going to be happy, but if I had my druthers, I would go with Hunter. But I love the rationale behind that. I mean, we're big Ernie Accorsi guys. Like, hey, just pour assets into that pass rush. I want to stay on that pass.
I want edge. I want Abdul Carter in the first round. I want Derek Harmon in the second round. In the third round, we could add Darius Alexander, and hell, that first pick in the fourth round, take Omar Norman. Like, I want everything plugged into those trenches on the D line.
I am a full 3.9 inches right now, dude. Let's go, baby. All right, yo. So one player I wanted to touch on too, because he's been like some Giant fans have mentioned him as the third overall pick. Dan and I think it's way too rich. We like the player, but we do see some faults in his game, and that is Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from the University of Michigan. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that, because people have maybe thought like, hey, maybe the Giants can trade back and then they can get Mason. So what are your thoughts on Mason Graham, the disruptor from Michigan?
I think let's say Travis Hunter goes 2 and Abdul Carter's there at 3. I think taking Mason Graham at 3 would be like taking Leonard Williams over a Micah Parsons type player. And that's obviously high comps for both of them, before they play in the NFL. And again, I'm just talking about level of player. I'm not comparing Graham like play style to Leonard Williams, but I think like you're adding a Leonard Williams type player instead of taking the Micah Parsons type player, like just total disruptor versus a guy who's going to be a good player for you. In that, I'm not okay with that. Defensive tackle is obviously the bigger need, and so it's like, let's plug in the defensive tackle instead of plugging in the edge. But I just feel like 5 years from now, we'll look back and be like, who do we want? Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter or Mason Graham? And I would take the first two guys, 10 times out of 10.
Like Kenneth Grant?
I haven't watched them yet.
Okay.
The back end of the first round defensive tackles I haven't watched yet. And that might be, affecting this a little bit too, where it's like there's day 2 and there's a lot of day 2 defensive tackles that I really like.
Yeah, agreed. And that's why, and this is the next area I want to bring up with you before we move past the third pick. It's why I don't love the idea at all, personally, of trading back in this draft class. I talked about with Nick, the only scenario I could even see that I would like is if we get a 2026 one from a team I can project to be really bad. And there's basically no option for that as far as the teams. Like, I don't even think the Raiders are guaranteed to be bad with Geno. So if you look at the depth of that tackle class and what will be available at 34, I don't want to trade back and get Graham. That's not a great solution for me. Outside of that, dude, like, trading back after 3, I'm running out of prospects I like right after 3 in this class. Or I should say love, not like. Right after 3 in this class. Like, let's listen to a mock draft with a few guys who break down film that I respect, and they're like at pick 4 or 5 getting the point of, do we consider Ashton Genty here? Because there's just like no other blue chip guys even available at that point. So are you in that camp, or would you consider trading back from 3?
Trading back always sounds good in theory,
Yep.
and then you end up with, guys that you don't want over the guys that you wish you had. I'm with you. I want to stick and pick at pick 3. I think this team needs great talent before they try and build whatever. But I want a great player. They got a great player in Malik Neighbors last year. So no. Now again, you think now I say that and it's like, okay, but that could set us up for quarterback next year, as all people that don't love Shedeur Sanders at pick 3. So I understand like they need quarterback and they probably should prioritize doing things that they can to get that quarterback eventually. But I'm pretty I want to take either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter at pick 3.
And let me ask you, and Nick, I'll let you get in a second here. I just want to do one more thing before we move to 34 and 65 realistic options. Just a general draft question. We know that at some point quarterback either has to be addressed this year or next. Has anyone stood out to you outside of round 1 at quarterback that you look to target? And if so, where? Is it somebody you're so aggressive you'd want to trade back into round 1 or round 2 for? Somebody you want to sit and take it 34 or 65? Like tools-wise, projection-wise, anything else at quarterback?
I'm anti-trading back into the first round. I think if you're willing to do that, you might as well just pick them at pick 3. I know it's worked out for teams, right? It worked out for the Ravens with Lamar. But the Ravens, you know what they should have done? Just drafted Lamar instead of,
over Hayden Hurst or whichever tight end they took.
It was
over.
Hayden Hurst, 26-year-old Hayden Hurst.
They had another first-round pick in that class. I can't remember who.
I think it was two tight ends. It was like Hurst and another tight end.
Well, they took
Mark Andrews.
Oh no, was it Patrick Queen? I think it was.
They took Hayden Hurst before Lamar, traded back up in the first round, selected Lamar, and then took Mark Andrews. I think at the top.
But they had three. I think they ended up having 3 picks in that first round.
I thought
maybe
they did
I'm wrong.
Too. I thought it was Patrick Queen, but maybe it's another year. I think.
Oh no, I was right. Wait. Hold on. I'm pulling up the 2018's Raven draft class for this. Oh no, it was just Hayden Hurst. Okay, you guys are right.
Wild.
So,
though,
but
right?
long.
I'm sorry to cut you up, but I always just found it wild that you had the conviction that Lamar Jackson could be this quarterback, but you took Hayden Hurst over. It just never made any sense.
Like a 25-year-old baseball player too.
Yeah, I know, dude.
Just shows how wacky the NFL draft really is.
Yeah. So again, you can make the right decision in a ass backwards way, but I just would rather do that. The only quarterback that it's like maybe you take a swing on to me is like Jalen Milroe, because I've laid it out before. You look at day 2 and day 3 QBs, they almost exclusively fail. Like I think the only guys who have legitimately succeeded in the last 6 years is Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy. And then you could look at hey, Sam Howell was a good 5th round pick as a backup QB, or Josh Dobbs. But in reality, actually turning out starters, it's only those 2.
Wow.
But go back farther though, it's a more of a high hit rate, I think. Go back to 2011, where you had Kaepernick and you had Andy Dalton and you had Derek Carr and you had players like that.
That's true. That is true. But I also think it's changed though, where teams have bought into the just take a swing. It's better off.
Penix, Knicks last year. Yep.
Yeah, maybe Penix and Knicks, 6 years ago go in the second round.
Right. Good point.
So I look at that and probably not. The one guy is Jalen Milroe, not because I'm sitting here I actually believe in this guy, but he's just undeniably talented.
Yeah.
He's got the big arm. He can, obviously, do a lot with his legs. Those are the guys that I would be willing to take the flyer and root for an outlier with, is a guy like Jalen Milroe, just because at least you're just molding a young ball of talent instead of trying to, create the 22nd best quarterback in the NFL.
And it's interesting. I just want to add this. It's interesting because I always talk about this with Nick. I view quarterback as a zero-sum game where, a lot of these guys just aren't going to work out and be anything in the NFL. And we came into this class knowing it was a weak quarterback class versus last year knowing it was an exceptionally strong quarterback class. As the process drags on, I feel like a lot of people convince themselves on a lot of these different prospects and pump them up, and then it starts to become a better quarterback class, when in reality, I'm not so sure it is. So if I'm not getting Cam Ward in this class, I'm not totally opposed to just skipping it altogether for this year and moving on to next year. It sucks. We need a quarterback, and everyone wants one now. And I can't believe they would pass on quarterback again. How could they do it again, Joe Shane? They're not taking a drafting quarterback, but we knew it wasn't a good class. So why?
It does suck.
Yeah.
And this is the part that I think we all have a hard time admitting. Getting a quarterback luck is involved.
Yes.
If they won 3 games last season, guess what? We'd have a quarterback. Instead they won 3 games in a year where 6 teams won 3 games, and then they have the the 3rd pick in the draft.
Right.
If the Patriots make that field goal at the end of the game in 23, they have a quarterback.
Right.
If Drew Lock doesn't have one of the 5 best quarterback rating games of NFL history, we're talking about the quarterback that they have. Unfortunately, it does have a little bit to do with luck, which I hate to admit. I like to have a rhyme and reason for everything, but the reality is I will never be the just take a swing. Not every quarterback prospects, of course not. They don't have to be perfect, but I also have to have some conviction in them. And I'm not just going to take a swing on quarterback because of the letters QB next to their name.
Right.
I'm right there with you. So before we transition a little bit more to defense, I know we talked a little bit about that with the number 3 pick. I just kind of want to ask about this wide receiver position. I think the Giants are in a very unique spot where they retained Darius Slayton for what seems like the 10th, possibly the 12th time, because I just keep thinking this guy's going to disappear and he keeps coming back to the New York Giants. And I have no problem with that because I am a fan of Darius Slayton. But you got Darius, you got Malik, you got Wandale, you brought in a bunch of blocking type of wide receivers like Lil Jordan Humphrey and Zach Pascal. And then obviously you have Jalen Hyatt, which this dude's just toiling away in this wide receiver room. But Are you in this wide receiver class, which seems to be deep and maybe not as high at the top other than Travis Hunter? What are your thoughts if you have studied the wide receiver position? And what are your thoughts on the Giants possibly investing a mid-round pick in the wide receiver position?
Yeah, I truly have like abandoned like, oh, we got to get this position in this round, and it's like Jack Batch out of TCU. I fell in love with him in Mobile, and then put on his film and fell even more in love with him. If they get out of day 2 with Jack Batch, I'm happy. And he's like best friends with Malik Neighbors, which helps. And again, as someone who wanted to bring back Slayton, I don't think the Giants should have created an unnecessary hole when they didn't have to and didn't have any other pending free agents that they were actually going to sign for more than a few bucks. And they even let Aziz and Jason Pinnock walk anyways. Again, like Darius Slayton, he's probably going to be top 5 in Giants receiving all time when it's all said and done. But you do have to have a plan for him, to replace him eventually. Again, I'm sure there's other 3rd round wide receivers I'll fall in love with as I watch them. But like, you bring it up, and anytime someone brings up the position wide receiver, Jack Bech goes into my head. I'm like, you know what? If he's on the Giants, I'm going to be pretty happy with it.
Have you watched the Stanford kid, Elok Ayumanor?
Yeah, a little bit. And I watched him against Travis Hunter in 2023. Another, bigger dude who could just makes tough catches. Yeah, like again, I don't know if he's the guy I want at 34, and he probably won't be there in the 3rd round. So I haven't lasered in on him as like somebody that I'm like rooting for to be on the Giants. But again, another good player. Was really disappointed when he didn't play in the Senior Bowl because I thought he was one of the guys I went down there to watch. But yeah, those types of guys who can project as like good wide receiver 2s are the guys that I'm looking to get. I'm a Slayton fan. I'm glad he's back, but I also would like to replace him eventually as well too.
And just to stay on this wide receiver position real quick, what the hell is going on with Jalen Hyatt? I mean, is it this guy just doesn't know exactly where he has to be when he's running routes? Is it that he's too weak? It just seems like there was so much positive momentum with him heading into last year's training camp, and then he just never saw the football field.
You guys are interviewing me, but I want to talk about Jalen Hyatt with you guys. I've been like the number 1 Jalen Hyatt hater before even this season. With Russell Wilson, he actually has a little bit of value. I think he's like Russell Wilson's the only QB who was like, Hyatt's value ups a little bit. He's just not a good wide receiver. And he was even in 23 when as a rookie, it's like this is fun at times, but he's an alert route. That's what he is. Now he can run, dude, and he can catch big passes. But we were talking about this on the show for Friday, Filato. You have Malik Neighbors, so you're never going to put Hyatt as the number 1 on a play, which means he's going to be the number 2, number 3, number 4 in the progression. And he can't get off of press, and he cannot run routes well, and you can't trust him to be in the right place. And if you're a quarterback, how am I going to try and go through my progressions? And you've been squeezed 5 yards inside the numbers because you can't get off the line of scrimmage, right? Like that Seahawks game where Malik Neighbors got injured and Slayton went off. I was like, yeah, Jalen Hyatt really fast. Guess who is 10 yards down the field, and guess who's 5 yards down the field? Slayton's 10, Hyatt's 5 because he can't get off the line of scrimmage, and you can't. Even if he can run a route decently versus zone, a dig or whatever, teams have kind of figured out. Just press him up, and he's not going to be in the place that that they want him to be, and it's going to be hard to play him. He was this was his issue out of Tennessee. Now, him as a 3rd round pick, I was okay with, but when he was rumored as a 1st round pick with the Giants that year, that was my anyone but player was Jalen Hyatt at pick 25. Anyone but Jalen Hyatt, and I thought as a 3rd rounder, you could get a little more value out of him, and it just hasn't happened because he's not better than the guys that are on the field. Is as simple as you can make it.
One of the things about Jalen Hyatt, Stan and I have talked about, he just needs to add a little bit of weight. That was a big talking point heading into training camp. If he can add a little bit of weight and get a little bit stronger, because to me, the guy has the quick feet. It's just, you're right. He does get kind of glued and stuck. And then if he's supposed to be in a certain location, it takes him that extra half second to a second to run around the press and then reestablish himself. And we know football, everything is timing based. So that second really does matter. But I'm looking at this young asset, this Bolitnikov winner, that's somebody that the Giants traded up for in this regime, and you can't find a way to get him on the football field. It's just another indictment on either the front office or the inability of this coaching staff to develop a wide receiver or an asset. And it seems like there's just been so many of this disconnect between Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, who are homies, right? And that's all well and good. But it does seem like Joe Schoen will draft somebody, give them to the coaching staff, and then the coaching staff will not be able to do anything with them. And that's something that reminds me of Jerry Reese and Tom Coughlin, if you go back to those days. And I like to think that we're not in that place, but how many more instances of this do we need? Because is it all Joe Schoen, or is it the coaching staff not being able to develop? I think that's a conversation that us Giant fans should have, even though there's a lot of conjecture to it.
Yeah. I mean, with Hyatt specifically, I put it more on the front office. This is, you know, I know I saved the, you know, the picture in my camera roll just in case, you know, Hyatt did explode, but I was kind of like, that Cowboys coach was right when he said, we know what you are. And that's what he's an alert route, which is nice. You'll get 3 games a year where he has 3 catches for 77 yards if you really want to use him, but he's just not someone you can rely on realistically. And the question becomes, who is he better in the starting lineup?
No, that's something that no, absolutely not. For me,
and if he's in your starting lineup, I feel like you've weakened your lineup, you know.
I agree. For me, it's more just, can you find a way to get him out there and do something other than run wind sprints? And that seems to be his role. But you traded up for that in the 3rd round.
Right.
Yeah. That you can get a Bryce Ford Wheaton as an undrafted guy who can do that for you. So it's just another absolute miss by this regime.
Yeah, well, with Russell Wilson, again, I think with Russell Wilson, it's the one quarterback they could have brought in who adds some, because Russ will throw that ball up and let him run under it. So I think Hyatt can do a little more, but it's still, it's not a full-time role. And you'll have, you know, we'll have 3 games this year, you know, possibly where he has, like I said, 3 catches, 77 yards. I'm like, if we just get this consistently, but I just don't have the faith that you ever will get that consistently out of Jalen Hyatt.
I want to touch a little bit. We're jumping all over the place, but that's all right. There's a lot to touch on. That 34th pick overall. So I look at it like there's a really good scenario where when the Giants are picking at 34, if they still have that pick, the best player available is going to be an interior defensive lineman, which is awesome because that's exactly what they need. I've started to study this interior defensive line class in depth. I freaking love this class. It's not only just good at the top end, it's talented, it's deep. But to me, there are definitely different styles of players in this interior defensive line class, which I find really interesting. And the Giants are in a position where, do they want that one-on-one pass rusher who can has upside as a great one-on-one pass rush winner next to Dex, as Dex gets all these double teams? Or do they want somebody on the interior who can help them really anchor down and stop the run? Because that's something that really sucked for them for the last season, at least, and really the last few seasons. As far as the prototype goes, what do you prefer if they're going to go interior defensive line at 34? And who are some of the players that maybe you think can do both that might be available to them? Because we know they're going to fall out of round 1, some of these guys.
Yeah, that's a tough question because I can make pitches for both styles. But where I think you can kind of get somewhat of that is Derek Harmon, who I don't want to spoil the whole podcast with Filato on Friday, where it's like, I think he's going to be really stout against the run. You know, he's not someone you're going to line up at nose tackle, but you move him all over the front. He just has a natural feel in the run game and won't ever be a great pass rusher, but he's got a quick first step. He can work outside in. You can use him in stunts, which Shane Bowen likes to operate, and he can be a useful pass rusher. He's not going to, you know, be one of the best pass rushing interior guys in the league, but he's a useful pass rusher to go with what he brings in the run defense. So I guess you could get a little bit of both there, but that's tough, like stylistically.
It's interesting because they're going to get double teams, and you like the idea of the upside, but they need someone to stop the run.
Yeah, I probably lean with the run because Dex is going to give you, you know, the pass rush, and he's going to pull up double teams, and you know they run stunts, and Kayvon and Burns can be pass rushers, can be streaky at times. So I guess I would lean the run defender. Like let's keep these linebackers clean because it really hurt Bobby Okereke this past year because of how they just weren't able to keep them clean the way Wink Martindale was with, you know, running, you know, less +1 boxes and more even boxes.
Any other defensive line prospects you consider at 34 outside of Harmon?
Let me pull it up right now.
I mean, if someone like Grant were to fall,
so I haven't watched him yet, so I'm sure there's someone like that. I like Darius Alexander. I don't know if he's a 34 guy for me.
He's got juice to him.
I mean, I'm pulling up my my defensive tackle. rankings.
Or let me as you're doing that, let me ask you this: what are some of the other players that fit like that you would consider in that range, or what else would you be looking for if the Giants keep that pick?
Walter Nolan is a defensive tackle. I forgot about him. With that pick, again, I would love, like we talked about before, the tackles. Josh Connerly, if he was able to fall, I really like him.
Okay.
I just think he's got the foot speed that you want. Obviously, is he the strongest guy in the world? No, but he's someone that I could see myself falling in love with. And I want to ask you a question, Dan. Would you consider Omarion Hampton if he was somehow fell to pick 34? Because I know, like, running back, the conversation is changing with it, and I was, someone who was kind of like pro running back, and then kind of jumped on the anti, running back thing, and now it's spinning back around, and like I just watched him. I was like, this is like a walking explosive play. Would I be willing to take this guy on?
I'm a huge Omarion Hampton fan. I view him as, like, to me, his comp that I haven't seen someone make. Maybe they have before. I view, because I watched this player extensively in college, Jonathan Taylor. He reminds me a lot of Jonathan Taylor, but even better after contact than Jonathan Taylor. And I've long made the case, Bobby, that after round 1 is when I start to consider running backs, get him on that 4-year contract cheap. But I would not consider it just because of the depth of the running back in this class. Like, I think we're going to get to pick 65, 99, all these picks, and just have phenomenal players available to us at running back. I'll say this: if my option was Hampton at 34 or no running back in this class, I'd be more willing to consider it. I think it'll be the biggest mistake Shane could make if he doesn't take a running back with one of those day 3 picks, considering the talent in this class and how many you need and how cheap you get them on that rookie contract. But I think for me, there's too many guys I like later in the draft to want to take running back that high.
Yeah, the guy. So, like, I just kind of went through my my little big board that I put onto a Google Docs sheet. So, like, the guys I look at, like I said, Walter Nolan, Josh Connerly, Derek Harmon, Hampton, I would consider. Gray Zabel, the O lineman out of North Dakota State. Scourton out of Texas A&M. I can't tell. I liked him in the coming out of Purdue last year. And then, didn't do as much for Texas A&M, but I still think he's better than what his numbers show. He's an edge I could consider there. I got Jack Besh looking at me in the face, but I'm going to say pass on that for now. So I guess those, would be like the 5 or 6 guys that I really got my eye on.
Let's move it. Let's keep it defensively. I want to flip a little bit outside of draft and just, we didn't get to talk about this earlier. We didn't get your take on what the Giants did defensively this offseason in free agency. Like, they've really retooled their secondary and added a couple pieces to the defensive line in the trenches. Where are you at with this defense? Does Shane Bowen finally have all the pieces he needs to actually do something we like on film schematically? Or do you feel a little bit of concern even regarding Bowen heading into this year?
He should. I think he has the DBs where he should be exotic in what he does with his coverages, where I thought it was anything but that. It was, cover 1, cover 3, not, 10 yards off, but playing with moderate cushion and just kind of relying on the front 4. Every once in a while, throw a nickel blitz at them and we'll stunt on 3rd down. They've clearly upgraded, right? But I'm not full on excited. One, I'm still very worried about the run defense, and I thought Paulson Adebo was the best cornerback in free agency if you eliminate the injury, but you can't eliminate the injury. And despite that, like, he gives up yards and has penalties, right? So he's sure as a hell's an upgrade, but there will be games where, like, Adebo struggled in that game and he gave up yards and he had a critical penalty, right? Like, he kind of lost the Falcons game for the Saints early in the season. And Javon Holland, I need buy-in from Javon Holland, and I need buy-in from the coaching staff and Javon, because he's talented. But I just kind of look at him as more of a preventer the last couple of years, more so than a playmaker. Use him, get him involved, spin the coverages, make him a key part of it, funnel stuff to allow Paulson Adebo to take chances and cheat on leverage and work to get interceptions. So use those guys, right? Nubin is versatile. We'll see how he's in year 2. So you've got these versatile pieces in Nubin and Holland as safeties. You got a corner who turns over the ball, and we'll see how Banks looks at cornerback too. Use those, do some more fun things on the back end with that secondary, and keep Bobby Okereke clean. But I still worry about the run defense, and Adebo and Holland are certainly upgrades, but how many wins are those guys adding is my worry. Is yes, they're upgrades, but we got to play 17 games as well too.
Look, I don't think it's ridiculous to assert that if the Giants get that defensive lineman to complement Dexter Lawrence. That will bring this whole thing
Right.
together. Like that has to happen. You can't
Mhm.
rely on Nacho, Raheem Nunez-Roches. You can't rely on Ledbetter. You can't rely on Roy Robertson Harris or DJ Davidson. You can't rely on those guys to be starters. You need to get a Derek Harmon, a Kenneth Grant, a Walter Nolan, if you can handle his personality, a TJ Sam, somebody. You need to get that
Yes.
guy. And then I think Shane Bowen will be able to do what he needs to do. And that will also allow Bobby Okereke to get back to his 2023 form rather than what we saw last year. And I hope, being sound against the run and applying pressure with those four rushers, whoever that fourth rusher is, that will allow the Giants to intercept some damn passes, right?
Yes.
Because that has to happen. How many times, Dan? I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but we had 6 interceptions last year in 2022. I think we had like 5 or so. That's absolutely terrible. You can't win games like that. You need to be able, as much as our offense has screwed our defense, the defense at sometimes needs to be able to put the offense into some great positions as well. We just have not played the New York Giants complementary football in so damn long. There's always one of the units that have just been dropping the ball significantly. So if we can just get, I think, that defensive lineman, that will allow Shane Bowen to run those 2 deep, 2 read coverages and allow Newbin and Holland to use their eyes and their discernment ability to undercut routes. And hopefully Tay Banks can take another step with his development and not, take a massive step back like it seemed like he did last year. So, and I'm just hoping that defensive lineman will give the comfort to Bowen to call the plays that he needs to allow that to manifest.
And that's where my excitement can grow for the defense, right? Because
Yeah.
again, we're recording this before they add, hopefully critical players in the draft. Like they add Travis Hunter at pick 3 and make him mostly a corner, and then Derek Harmon is someone who plays at least above average right away. And they get a clean bill of health from most of their key guys, which is always the wild card that it's hard to consider in the offseason. But that's where I could get a little more excited about this unit, because then you got Travis Hunter and Paulson Adebo. You talk about interceptions, you're getting interceptions.
Yep.
And I think that's going to help create interceptions for Newbin and Javon Holland, who, Newbin only had 1 pass breakup last year. Holland's only interception over the last 2 years was a Hail Mary. So that's where you get the hands and those, or the football in those guys' hands, and you allow Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau to do more damage up front.
Yeah. In addition to Dexter Lawrence and Harmon, I mean, you really at that point have, at least on paper, what I would consider to be one of the better defenses. I don't know how to not consider that on paper. Obviously, things have to come into fruition. We have to see stuff from Shane Bowen, and we have to see health. Mostly, I think, from the Giants. I mean, Brian Burns was playing hurt throughout the whole year, wasn't able to play at his full capacity. Deontay Banks, a player who still needs to take a step forward. Linebacker-wise, I guess that's the last spot we haven't hit defensively. Where are you at there? We were big fans of the progression Micah McFadden took on tape last year, but there is still that part of me that's like, I always kind of wish the Giants will at some point invest in one of these day 2 linebackers that I think can be like a difference maker.
That's probably the position I've ignored the most in the pre-draft process.
Sure.
I'll get around to getting some done eventually. But Okereke, I think not the Ravens year, the Wink Martindale year was like an outlier for him.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of like, man, Wink put him in situations to do well, and he did really well after he started really trusting it after, I feel like after the 49ers game, he really bought into what it was happening. And then last year was just not the same player, and that Bucs game really left a bad taste in my mouth where I'm like, man, if there's anyone who really struggled in this game, it was you, and then you got injured maybe right after that or soon after that. But you got to keep your linebackers clean, right? Like, unless you have the best linebacker in the NFL, like you got to do a better job of keeping Okereke clean. So Okereke is a good linebacker 1, even if he doesn't look like it all the time. And then McFadden, like you said, if he's your number 2, that's an okay problem to have for the Giants. Like, he's not much value on 3rd down and coverage, but I was pretty happy with his season last year, because if there was one person who I thought would really struggle with the loss of Wink Martindale, it was going to be Micah McFadden, because of how much he had the green light to go and follow Okereke, and Wink totally took him off the field on 3rd down for Isaiah Simmons, so you never really saw his coverage limitations that much.
Overall, as we look at this roster now, heading into the draft, heading into the next season, I actually, and I know Nick feels this way too, and last year I was pretty pessimistic about the team. 2 years ago, I was too overly optimistic. The year before that, we were optimistic and we were right. The first table year. I actually have some optimism about winning football games as we go into next year. I have always been along the lines of I thought Daniel Jones held this team back a lot more than people realize with his play on the field, and just with his play pre-snap, post-snap, everything that went into it. So I think no matter what, Russ and Jameis are an upgrade there. I think that the offensive line we've talked about a little bit, and then the defense coming together. Like, I know the schedule is tough, but am I stupid to be feeling a little more optimistic about being a competitive team this year?
Competitive, yes. Good. I just don't see it, right? Russ is still a flawed quarterback at this point of his career. And hopefully everyone stays healthy, but rarely do they. And like you said, it's a tough. Like if you took this team in the 2022,
Okay,
might be a little more excited. But that schedule is
right.
legitimately, like, I think it's ranked the toughest schedule in the
It is.
NFL, coming off of a 3-win season. It's kind of nuts. So it's like you could even see all these improvements, but they're going to be just playing team after team after team. And I don't think the Cowboys, if the Cowboys have Dak Prescott, they're so much of a better team than what they were last year. And then you got this tough division that they're in. So I don't think we'll be looking them good, but our standards have kind of been lowered where if they like went 7-10, it'd be like, you know what? That's for me, like that'd be the second best season of doing content covering the Giants would be a 7-10 season.
my
Like I'd be
God.
thrilled for a 7-10 season. Like
Especially,
people aren't tuned out by October, 17th. That would be awesome.
I know it's so bleak. It really is. But you're going up against the AFC West and the NFC North. Like it's a
Terrible.
murderer's row. And I would feel so much more comfortable if the Giants could actually win some divisional games, but they never do. Like they don't win divisional games, which is a huge issue. So yeah, I'm a little pessimistic as well. But to Dan's point, this is going to be, I think, at least a competent football we're going to be seeing, and it can maybe steal a game here or there and play that underdog card that they successfully employed back in 2022. But yeah, no, it's I really wish the schedule wasn't those two divisions.
Let me finish up then, Bobby, with a 30,000-foot view question. I know you were on the same side as Nick and I, or at least I remember, I think, from listening to your content last season, of you wanted to move on from Dable and Shane. Is that correct?
Mostly Joe Shane,
Okay.
and then Brian Dable. I mean, Dable has his issues, but he was more collateral damage of like I felt like they should have moved off from Joe Shane.
Right, like a GM should be able to hire his own coach type of situation, which I was on board with as well. What do they have to do this year? What, in ideal world, what do they have to do this year for you to change your opinion of them long term for this franchise?
I hate not simply saying win games because it's year 4 and that should be the standard.
Yeah.
But I know that won't necessarily be the standard for keeping their job. Like here's one thing, right? They paraded the 2024 class. I definitely think it's their best one so far. Make it more than just a in the now parade. Like, hey, we look at these rookies, right? Theo Johnson and Tyler Nubin, and I'll say even Drew Phillips,
Right.
Or Tyrone Tracy, I think is a hit basically regardless, but Neighbors as well. But if like those 3 guys play the same way they did year 2 as they did year 1, they'll go from loved by the fan base to hated by the fan base. There are flaws that DC sometimes they won't, get away with. The fact that Phillips, again, he had like 1 interception that fell in his lap and no pass breakups, like that won't be okay in year 2. Tyler Nubin having 1 pass breakup for the entire year, that won't be okay in year 2. Theo Johnson having 300 something yards, that won't be okay in year 2. And that class that you paraded and may have saved your job is now looking like something that's not that great, right? I mean, think about after the 23 class, right? They were, we got Jalen High in the 3rd round. Look at the big plays. Deontay Banks, he's going to be our corner 1. And that obviously hasn't worked out. So you need that to happen. But, I'm going to go back to it because I remember doing the Daniel Jones player profile projection episode in 2022. Like, what does he need to do for this to not be his last year? We talked about like this, that, and this, and we finally ended like, you know what? Win games, and we won't get over because they can make all the progress in the world and be like they're a better team, but they're losing to this tough schedule. We're not gonna care at the end of the day. It really comes down to wins and losses. Winning hides your losses, and losing hides your your successes. So in reality, I think it really is win like 7-8 games. And they keep their job. If they win 5 or 6, I think they're probably out of here.
I think you're right about that. The expectation is really low, and so winning 7 or 8 would be a big win for them with this schedule. We'll have to see how it plays out. But Nick, anything else from you before we close out?
Nah, Bobby, thanks for joining the show, man. It's always fun talking football with you, brother.
No, thank you guys again. Starting the new channel, so appreciate any help given. So you guys are always thankful for you guys. So yeah, go check out the show Friday with Filato. Dan, we usually have you on a couple weeks after the draft, so I'll be excited to do that year-round tradition, and appreciate you guys as always.
Yeah, it's the Giants Nation show. You can find that on YouTube right after going to this. I highly suggest you check it out if you're not already a fan. I assume you are. And so help support Bobby. He's doing this thing on his own now. He's starting from scratch despite building everything up that he did. And he's going to do a great job because he's a great content creator and he knows his shit, especially when it comes to the X's and O's. And you loved him here, so you'll love him there. So check that out right after this. Subscribe. And I don't know when it'll be on iTunes, Bobby. Is it already on all the podcasts?
It's a pain in the ass. I published like a 1-minute episode like a week ago just to get out, and it's still not out there. So for right now, it's on YouTube. Eventually, it'll be on Apple and Spotify and everything.
Yep. So there you go. You'll be able to watch or listen, whatever you like. So, Bobby, thank you so much for joining us. Always love talking Giants football with you. For everybody else, have a great rest of your week. I didn't ask it yet, so hit that like button right now. We need you to just hover your hand over that mouse. Juice the algorithm for us. Click like, then leave a comment. Just give a shout out to Bobby. Why not? And just do anything you want in the comment section. Just put something there. Get that algo. Help us juice this algo. We got more shows coming for you this draft season. We've done an episode a day every April for the last few years. We're probably doing the same. So help us get this going. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.